Welcome back to the Deeper Dive podcast, produced locally in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese of Washington, D.C., here at Sacred Heart Roman Catholic Church in La Plata, Maryland. My name is Bill Winnell, joined today by Father Bob Kilner. How are you, Father?
Doing well. It's good to be back.
Father Larry Swing. Father, how are you feeling?
Hey, I am feeling great.
Well, Senior Pope is away in Ireland on pilgrimage, so pray for him. And Father Dan's out feeding the poor somewhere. So today we're going to talk about saintly chaplains in the Catholic Church. We'll start with Father Bob.
Fantastic. So we've got Veterans Day coming up. This has been on my mind in a big way, talking about the heroic men and women who have given everything and risked everything for the sake of our freedoms. Right now, my parochial vicar is Father Tong Win. Just yesterday, November 7th, he became an American citizen, and his citizenship was essentially fast-tracked because he was fighting for freedom inside Vietnam while he was a young man before he was ordained a priest. He was jailed, I think, like 3 or 4 times. Each time they made it a little worse, right? First time they jailed him, they kind of scared him, let him go. The second time they jailed him, beat him, let him go. Second time, third time they put him in, an empty, dark cell, tiny cell for days, didn't feed him, right? So, and the reason they were doing that was because he was the leader of the Catholic student movement at his university. And he just wouldn't give up. He just wouldn't stop. So they let him go, and he kept doing it. So that he found out that they were going to arrest him, and that would be the end of it. They'd arrest him, and then he'd disappear. So he actually fled, and he fled first to Thailand, and then he found his way to California, and he found his way to Washington, D.C. And he's still fighting for religious freedom in Vietnam, still advocating for that. And he's a priest of the Archdiocese of Washington as of this past June. So I just keep thinking about him and that heroism that he shows. He's not showy about it. I think none of the men that we are going to talk about really they probably wouldn't be comfortable being talked about, because they're like, no, I'm just doing my job. I'm just doing what I ought to do. So just want to give a little bit of honor to these Catholic chaplains. We're going to be focusing on the Korean War and the Vietnam War in particular today. But Father Larry, you're really good friends with a retired Catholic chaplain as well, Father Mike. Could you tell me a little bit about him?
Yeah, I've always been very edified by Father Michael Dusterhouse, and he's just he's a big personality, him, and but it was really, he'd always kind of get teared up when he would talk about his experiences with the soldiers. And there was almost like this desire always to go back to battle and be with the guys. And when, in some of the reading I've been doing about these particular chaplains that are, some of them are up for sainthood, and rightfully so, is that the best chaplains were the ones that were like in the trenches with their soldiers. And that was Mike. I mean, he would go on runs with them. A lot of these guys were like scared 18-year-olds. A lot of them were there because they were trying to get out of trouble. They had, sort of banged up family situations. They just searching for God. And a lot of them, basically came to God because he was that source of fatherhood that they needed. And, there's been times where he was, right now he's the one thing that I've, really been moved by with Mike is his body is just shut down because of his service to the United States, because of all the vaccinations he got, and also, sucking down some pretty bad chemical stuff from Afghanistan. His legs are just on fire constantly. And I think once they said that he wanted to amputate his legs, and he said, "Can you just cut these off?" And he said, "Well, it's going to still burn." He's like, "All right, I'll keep my legs," And so he just has been, offering up his suffering and really found himself like he literally gave his body for his country and for souls. And so I think, there's not a guy. Sometimes you meet soldiers like Dusterhouse. I know Chaplain Dusterhouse. This, like they just smile, because he was just a beacon of hope for guys when they're in really dark situations. And I know, Bill, you were saying that, one of the problems today is a lot of these poor guys, these souls, can't find a Catholic chaplain. And your son was a Marine, and he was, Father Dusterhouse was a Marine, and he's a Navy chaplain and worked primarily with the Marines. And you were saying that your son, what was it, that he didn't have a chaplain for how long?
Yeah, he saw a Navy chaplain once in 4 years while deployed. Obviously, stateside's a little bit different, but in Afghanistan, they one Christmas actually they brought in a Navy chaplain. Literally flew him in for like a 3-hour period, for the guys and the male and female Marines in Helmand Province to avail themselves of the sacraments. And all three of us know Father John Ruderman well. He's an Air Force chaplain who we probably could have got on here, but the time difference is way too. He's in South Korea right now, but in his case, he's been at many places, both overseas and here. And once when he was in Montana, I mean, he would have to go out to. He was stationed at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where as a obviously not state secrets that it's one of our nuclear bases where we have a lot of silos, and he would literally go out to hear confessions for a couple of days at a time for these airmen who just aren't allowed to leave their posts. Some of these silos, and there's just an incredible shortage of chaplains right now. That's why I'm always I'm always torn whenever I hear that one of our own diocesan priests are considering it. It seems like I'm always like, at first we're going to lose you to that, but lose you because they need you so badly. So
Right. So I'll give you guys $100 if you tell me who the patron saint of the Marines is. You'll never get it.
Patron saint of the Marines. I have no idea.
Saint Barbara.
I figured it was going to be a girl because you made your bed so big.
Listen to this. While her tyrannical father Dioscorus kept her locked in a tower, Saint Barbara devoted her time to prayer and secretly asked to be baptized. After being tortured often, her own father beheaded her and got struck down by lightning. Due to this connection with lightning, the Marine Artillery have an annual event to celebrate her for protection against thunder, lightning, accident involving explosions and gunpowder.
That's interesting because
That's
at least in my son's unit, they all wore St. Michael patches on their flak. And interesting thing, and I did learn this from Father John as well. The Marine Corps is out of all the services, the Marine Corps is the highest percentage of Catholics. Really don't know why. It just is, and I'll throw that out there.
Yeah,
I could take a stab at that. There's something about Catholicism that just works with the Marine Corps. Now I'm from an Army family. My grandfather was a Marine. Once a Marine, always Marine, but retired Marine. But everybody else, uncles, brothers, cousins, are all in the Army. But I think there's something to be said about the Marine Corps. There's something like they're about that these folks who are just they're a bit more passionate as fighters, right? They're a bit more I don't want to say crazy because they're I'm sure some Marines are crazy, some soldiers are crazy, but yeah, they've got a bit of like a good Catholic chip on their shoulder of like, yeah, we are here to deal out justice to the enemies of God and country, right? It's just there's something about the Marines that's particularly Catholic.
And we got Veterans Day coming up shortly, and that's one of the reasons we're doing this. So, this book, Father Bob, you were mentioning, can we kind of open up on some of these chaplains a little bit and why, the impact they had, not just when they were in the field, but now years later. I was going to talk about Capodanno, but you want to hit maybe one of the other guys that maybe you encountered in that book that you thought was pretty interesting?
Yeah. First, I want to cover from the Korean War.
Yeah.
The servant of God, Emil Kapaun.
Yeah.
Now, Emil, what you were saying about Father Mike, I think lines up really well with Father Emil, because he had this intense desire to not separate himself from his people, from his men, in any way. So I'll read from the book real quick. So on All Saints Day, November 1st, 1950, Father Emil Kapaun said Mass 4 times for the men of the 3rd Battalion, 8th Cavalry Regiment at their encampment in Unsan, Korea, about 50 miles from the border with China. About 1 in the morning on All Souls Day, November 2nd, the camp awoke to the blare of bugles and the mournful sound of sheep horns, which Chinese peasant warriors had carried into battle for generations. A massive force of Chinese, 20,000 men, had the 3,000 Americans all but surrounded. A ferocious battle erupted in which the Chinese encroached deeper and deeper into the camp. After daybreak, in spite of repeated attacks by American bombers on the Chinese, they were still inflicting terrible casualties on the American forces. So Father Kapaun and his assistant, Private First Class Patrick Schuler, got a jeep and loaded it up with wounded men whom they tried to take to a safe place. Now that the American position was completely surrounded, there was no safe place. The priest and Schuler were making another run when they encountered a Chinese roadblock. Kapaun ordered his assistant to the rear, then ran off on foot to find more wounded. Schuler never saw Kapaun again, and this is what he did. GIs reported later that they saw Kapaun running from foxhole to foxhole, praying over the dying, hearing hasty confessions, dragging the wounded away from the front lines and out of no man's land. Some of the soldiers screamed at the priest to escape. He ignored them. So he's making sure that he can do his job, even though it's essentially certain death. He is providing spiritually for his men. So he is,
Actively.
along with hundreds of soldiers, he is captured, and they're forced to march 75 miles. So at one point, he becomes a stretcher bearer. He volunteered to be a stretcher bearer right out of the gates to carry some of the wounded. And there's this lieutenant who he's bearing the stretcher with, and he introduces himself. And this lieutenant says, "Father Kapaun, I've heard about you." And his response was, "Well, don't tell my bishop," which is like such a great response. Be like, like kind of joking, but at the same time to say, yeah, like, don't tell my bishop that I'm throwing myself into this in a way that he wouldn't approve of, and maybe not, right? Because he's putting himself in danger. I don't think folks understand that a chaplain doesn't, in a chaplain's orders, this is beyond the expectation. A chaplain, you find him on a base on, in that's safe. You'll find him at a fob, maybe. You'll find them at headquarters, right? But for a chaplain to do this, that is way above and beyond the call of duty. It's not an expectation, but for these guys, it was. So they're captured, and they're essentially starving the guys, right? They're not giving them enough to survive. So the book continues, with all the prisoners on the verge of starvation, Father Kapaun organized raids on the guard's supply shed. I love it. Wow. His best co-conspirator was Lieutenant Walt Mayo, a devout Catholic, a graduate of Boston University, a World War II veteran, and a man with movie star good looks. Mayo would start an argument with the guards, while Kapaun and his raiders slipped into the supply shed, stuffed their pockets with food, stole sacks of rice, 2 bags each, and scurried back into their huts. His fellow POWs described the priest's gift for thievery as ingenious. Father Kapaun attributed it to the intercession of St. Dismas, the good thief who was crucified next to our Lord. And he prayed to him before every foray on the guard's food store. The entire time, so he had the option of not being with the enlisted men because he was an officer, like being in kind of separate housing. And he insisted on being with them the entire time. Before he was imprisoned, like he never wanted to be away from the enlisted men. And then after he was imprisoned, he continued that. He continues, for all the horrors of the camp, he encouraged his fellow POWs not to despair. He prayed the rosary with them daily, which was dangerous because all religious services were forbidden. and he boosted their morale when he resisted the guards' thought control techniques at the camp's compulsory brainwashing sessions. So at one point, he spoke up to the I think it was a Chinese soldier um, who said this. He heckled him. So a guard who had learned to speak English at a Christian mission told him, "Don't ask God for your daily bread. Ask Mao Zedong. He's the one who supplies your daily bread." And Father Kapaun answered, "If this is an example of your God's daily bread, then your God must be a terrible baker." So he just threw it right back at these guys, which kept the morale high and helped them. So that's just a bit about Father Kapaun, somebody who didn't give up, somebody who just wanted to be right there next to his men all the time. And that's something that you would mention about Father Mike. He just always wanted to be with his guys. He would, while he wouldn't go, armed into a firefight, he would go with them, like in the helicopter, in the Black Hawk, in the Apache, to their drop zone, and then he would be there to receive them in the helicopter, when they were being exfiltrated as well. So he didn't have to do that, but he insisted on doing that because he needed to be a father to his men. That's exactly what Father Emil did as well.
It's interesting. I was talking to, I don't know if John, John Kirk.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he worked with your brother, but he called me up today because he's a parishioner at St. Bernadette's, and he was talking, we were talking a little bit. He's asking how we're doing. And I told him about our podcast today, and he's like, "Oh yeah. Well, he had talking to Joe, your brother, and Joe had shared some pretty amazing stories about chaplains when he was a Green Beret, and how the chaplains had incredible influence on some of these guys, and some incredible conversions that happened by the interaction with the chaplain and these men, during combat or during training or whatever it might be."
Yeah.
And I think it's just that sort of like, I think it was the optimism that the chaplains show in very dark situations.
Yeah. Yeah, it was dark. Yeah. So Joe would be, you definitely just raised him up a notch. He wasn't a Green Beret. He's a Ranger trained. He was with the Army Corps of Engineers, and he was doing convoy security in Iraq. Bill, you probably know exactly what that means.
Not a
which
slouch.
means essentially, you're moving important stuff from one forward operating base to another, or from the forward operating base into essentially into enemy territory, because they were building all sorts of stuff, both military stuff and then stuff for the Iraqis, schools and hospitals and stuff like that. So they've got a convoy of big trucks and Humvees and armored personnel carriers that needs to be guarded along these desert roads and there's so much real estate to cover. There's like huge potential for IEDs. He didn't tell us how dangerous it was while he was there. We only found out later. But yeah, Ranger trained, went to airborne school, Army Corps of Engineers. But yeah, some pretty good stuff. But he had mentioned while there, he had a chance to go to confession and go to Holy Mass, which wasn't it wasn't uncommon, but it wasn't like a regular thing. I think it was like twice a month that he was able to see the chaplain. And so the priest hears his confession, and he goes, "Are you do you know Saint Josemaria Escriva?" Right, like that's the first, after hearing his confession. That's exactly what the priest said. He said, "Well, yeah, I went to this school called the Heights over in Potomac, right?" And he said, "Well, yeah, I can tell based on your confession, right? You're actually really, really well formed." So thankfully, he became really good friends with that chaplain, and that guy was really helped him out a lot, and he helped out his whole all the guys at that fob and others.
That's
All right.
awesome.
So Father Bob gets the free beer because he worked Escriva's name in before you did. So
Ding, ding, ding.
What was it? Look at it. It's about 20 minutes on the dot it took. So
Nice. That's all it took.
very good.
I got a little bit on Capodanno.
Well, before,
Yeah,
real
let's hear
quick,
that.
Father, I'm not trying to throw Father Larry under the bus here, but I'm sitting here listening to Father Bob discuss Kapaun's his worries about, oh, I hope the bishop doesn't find out that I'm, doing this. And I'm just thinking about your chief concerns are, I hope the bishop doesn't hear about me one wheeling through the city or or using a scooter through the city. Meanwhile, this guy's jumping from foxhole to foxhole. But anyway, no medal for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, Father Larry, I hear you've had, I hear the one wheel's working out pretty well for you. It's
Yeah. I'll be using
but
that.
but on
Wow.
occasion it kind of doesn't work out so well. I learned that a few times. How's that going, Father Larry? I heard you got some scars from that one wheel.
I was showing it to Father Scott, and my cassock got caught underneath the wheel. So it was more of a.
I'm gonna go to every business this happened to and see if I can get some video, some security footage of this event.
It would have gone viral if you had it on video. It would have gone viral.
So you were riding it in your cassock. You wanted to just look like you were floating,
Exactly.
like you were
Yeah.
levitating.
Yeah, it's super cool.
Yeah.
It is. The kids absolutely love it.
They do.
Street cred when you roll up to the school on a one wheel.
Yeah, after school, you're just riding around talking like kids. Fantastic. So a little bit about Capodanno. I mean, and these guys, it's almost like, I guess I know where do they get this desire? I mean, obviously from our Lord, but in 1949, he joined the Maryknoll missionaries. He's from New York and grew up in Staten Island. And then what happened is he did about 9 years with the missionaries, and then he was asked to basically take charge in Taiwan and also with Chinese men in 1960, preparing them to for college entrance exam. And for the Chinese and for these people, this was a huge thing because like they were not to get into college would lead to all kinds. I mean, that was like their whole future was based on whether or not they got into college. But he would be, help them with spiritual and emotional needs. I think that helped him when he later became a soldier. And then he asked the missionaries if he could join the Navy when Vietnam broke. And during Holy Week of 1966, Father Capodanno reported to the 7th Marines in Vietnam as a chaplain for the battalion. His immediate focus was the young enlisted troops, or grunts. Later transferred to a medical unit, Father Capodanno was more than a priest ministering within the horrific arena of war. He became a constant companion to the Marines, living, eating, sleeping in the same conditions of the men. He established libraries, gathered up and distributed gifts, and organizing outreach programs for the local villagers. He spent hours reassuring the weary and disillusioned, consoling the grieving, hearing confessions, instructing converts, and distributing St. Christopher medals. Such work energized him, and he requested an extension to remain with the Marines. It was during his second tour on September 4th, 1967, with the 3rd Battalion, that Father Vincent Capodanno made his ultimate sacrifice. I can't remember what the name of the ambush was, but there was a North Vietnamese ambush. I think it was called Operation Silence.
Operation. Yeah, it's.
What was it called? Operation
Swift.
Yeah, Operation Swift. And so it was the same thing that you were talking about. They were just surrounded, and they were pinned down by enemy machine gunner who had administered. And basically, I watched this video, and it was kind of a tearjerker where this guy, now he's an elderly man, and he said, I was pinned down. He had all the equipment, 70 pounds of communication equipment on him. He had been shot by a sniper. And basically, Capodanno picked him up. He says, "I got you," and just brought him to safety. And then they met eyes, and he said, "That's the last I saw him." And then he was brought away. And then what happened is there was a medical guy who was shot, and he was being fired at, even though he didn't have a firearm. Not supposed to shoot at the medical guys. And so he basically put his body in front of the medical guy and took 27 bullets in the back, and died, and then posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor in 1969, and is now buried in Staten Island and is considered a servant of God. And when you look at some of the videos about this guy, I mean, people say not only did he I mean, so many guys are like, that guy like put everything on the line. And once again, he went beyond the realm of duty. He basically saved a guy from two guys, and more than that, from being killed. I was thinking about that movie Hacksaw Ridge. It's just sort of like the guy without the gun is doing most of the work. So once
Right.
again, it's
Right.
a depiction of sacrificial love. And I think every guy, I don't know if you thought about it, but I definitely can't do it now. But I thought at one point it would be cool to give your life not just for God, but also for your country, as a chaplain. But I think there's also a cost that comes with that, you know?
Big time.
Yeah. What do you think is the biggest cost for a priest becoming a chaplain?
Yeah. I tell you what, you don't have as many baptisms or marriages that you're doing, right? Maybe you do. Maybe some chaplains do. But I think it's the cost that every soldier, airman, Marine, sailor risks, which is like being away from family, from friends, being in like honestly the trauma that comes from war, all of that. But these guys, yeah, they just put it all on the line, and they didn't shield themselves from any of the struggles that these men were going through. In fact, they went there, right? So they're a lot of the Marines spoke about Father Capodanno. They One of the guys called him a true mud Marine, right? He was like there in the mud with them. Like he was in the same barracks. He would, he'd say, "Hey, let me carry that heavy pack. I want to be with you wherever you guys are." Um, he's quoted as saying this. He says, "Well, I want to be available in the event of anything serious occurs, to learn firsthand the problems of the men and to give them moral support and to comfort them with my presence. In addition, I feel I must personally witness how they react under fire and experience it myself to understand the fear that they feel." So there's a true fatherly heart, right? You can't really empathize with somebody. You can't really be compassionate unless you have some inkling of the pain that they're going through. So we wanted to know that pain so we could know his men better. So I mean that's a pretty serious sacrifice. He was willing to go there for his guys. But I guess going back to your question, what do you think is something that we would give up, Father Larry, to go from parish life to military chaplaincy?
Well, I know one of the things that kept me from doing it was the lack of fraternity with other
Right.
priests. And my fear was like, okay,
But one of the reasons you wanted to do it was because getting out of like parish council meetings, right?
oh,
Uh,
100%.
right.
Yeah, well, believe me, they got their version of parish council
For
meetings.
sure.
Very bureaucratic and they're probably very strenuous. Uh, but I think it was the idea that, well, I can hear everyone else's confession. Who's going to hear mine? And I remember going back to Father Mike Dusterhouse, like he said at one point, in Opus Dei, we're supposed to go to confession, or we're asked, and I've gone regardless every week. I went today. One of the priests came out to hear my confession. It was great. And but I remember Father Dusterhouse was talking about like when he was sent over. He was in the desert somewhere, and it had been 6 months since he'd been in confession. And he went to the commanding officer, and he's like, "I need you to find me a priest." And he's like, "Well, I don't know, Father. I mean, we don't have any around here." And he goes, "Well, if you don't find one, you're going to lose one. I need to go to confession. Like I
Yeah.
need." So the commanding officer got an Apache helicopter and flew him to Japan or something, where he got
Wow.
to go to confession. Actually, got a little mini retreat and came back. But it was one of those things where, unfortunately, because um, there's such a few number of chaplains available at this point, I think they're struggling more than any other part of the priesthood right now. I mean, a lot of dioceses struggle with a lack of vocations, but because of that, a lot of bishops are unwilling to let go of their guys to the military because we have to cover their own parishes. The military is really struggling.
Yeah.
And so I think that would be and you could go months without seeing a brother priest. And for me, it's like, if I don't see a priest, once a week, it's just like, gosh, you feel like you don't have that fraternity. So
Yeah.
that's a huge sacrifice, I think.
That's tremendous. Yeah. I mean, I was considering religious life before I entered the diocesan priesthood, because I was afraid I wouldn't have that. Like that, I needed that fraternity, that guys by my side to help me live my vocation well. And then I realized, no, um, in parish life, in diocesan life, especially around here, where it's like I'm not 2 hours from the next parish, right? I'm 15 minutes from the next parish. Um, yeah, you have to be really, you have to make it a priority, this priestly fraternity. But thank God, a lot of the guys around here do.
And little did you know that you were going to live with him for a couple of years.
Yeah. That's so.
Speaking
Yeah,
of
just for a
fraternity.
little bit of background, if you're new to our podcast, this is kind of like the boys being back in town. Father Larry was my first pastor 7 years ago when I was ordained. I was with him at Sacred Heart La Plata for 2 years and 3 months. But who's counting?
Wow, I was going to say he had it down to the month. Wow.
Yeah. 2 years, 3 months, 17 days, and 21 hours.
17 peanut butter knives.
Yeah. Just purgatory. Just awful. No, I'm joking. It was fantastic. So, and you kind of set the bar high for priestly fraternity. But you're right. In military chaplaincy, you don't always have that. You're not guaranteed to have that. Yeah. So how blessed we are. So if there are any young men out there considering the priesthood and passionate about perhaps a military career, I'd encourage you, find a diocese that is friendly to co-sponsorship with the Archdiocese of Military Services.
Yeah.
That would be tremendous. I know Washington is, I know Arlington is. Typically dioceses that have an influx of vocations, a lot of vocations right now will be, but that's not a guarantee. Father Larry, do you know of any other places that would be good for men who are interested in being a military chaplain?
I think DC's military friendly, of course, but I think that I mean, actually, I'm not really. I mean, I wouldn't be able to say that in terms of like other dioceses. I mean, I know that maybe Arlington, because they have so many priests.
Yeah, they're doing really well.
And they're doing really well. And I think they do have a lot of chaplains that come out of that particular diocese, because they have, some parishes have 5 or 6 guys in there, so they have tons of vocations, and they're really, I mean, some guys don't become pastors for years, and I think you have to go where there's a lot of priests, because if there's a lot of priests, they have more flexibility to let you go for, a couple years, and then they get you for good once you retire, which is good.
And you are subject to recall.
Yes.
To the diocese you're incarnated in. Yeah.
Yeah. You're under the bishop. You're released. Released to no one just goes to the military. You have to be released from a particular diocese or archdiocese before you can join. And I really do. I really am edified by the guys who go in there with the right motives. I mean, you could go in with wrong motives too, because I mean, it's a sweet lifestyle. They get, they got you get a officer's paycheck, you get your own place, blah, blah, blah. There could be some temptations there. But I mean, if you're going with the right attitude, like the guys we've been talking about, simply to serve and get rid of your money.
Right. Yeah. Give it away. Yeah. A lot of the guys that we've been talking about, military chaplains, we know these guys are not like, they're not buying fancy cars and stuff. They're like, they're sending money home, or they're like given to a good cause. Right. Because you're making officers pay, right? You start out as at least a second lieutenant. Usually, you're like right away a lieutenant in the Army, if you're going Army. But yeah, so many of these guys that I know, military chaplains, they end as like colonel, right? Which is like full bird colonel. That's pretty impressive. Yeah, I spent a summer at the U.S. Air Force Base in Ramstein, Germany, and the chaplain there, the head chaplain there, was a Catholic, and it's like essentially a city. Kaiserslautern, which is right next door, and Ramstein is like it's the size of a small American city in the middle of Germany.
He's not kidding. There's like car dealerships on these bases. I mean, it's
yeah.
Wow.
There's so many more Americans than are Germans. So there were 12 different chaplains there of different faiths. There was, the head chaplain, and then the retired guy who was essentially a contractor, and then this young lieutenant. And the young lieutenant was by far, I'm sitting in staff meetings with this, and he's like giving updates on the units that he was assigned to, and so you'd have to essentially give a report of, okay, what have you done for the past 3 weeks, a month, right? And he was talking about like, walking the runways with these guys, right? Like, hearing confessions. He said, well, I clocked 17 miles worth of walking yesterday as I heard confessions with my guys. And the Protestants were looking at him like, what? You spent how much time? Right? Now that's fatherhood right there. That's living your priesthood so beautifully. Now, all the Protestant guys were married with children, and they couldn't possibly invest that much time. Like, he was there from well before dawn, doing everything, eating with them, working out, hearing confessions, going to meetings with them, like helping, fix helicopters. Like, he was just there all day and well into the night. And that's just impressive. That's once again, that's something. There's something so beautiful about priesthood that I have a singular focus on the salvation of souls, and I can afford to just give myself away because I'm not being called in any other direction. What do you think, Larry?
No, 100%. I was thinking about, I wish we had Father John Ruderman on this podcast.
Yeah.
And
Well, I don't have a bleep button on this thing, so I'm not sure we could have done
exactly. Yeah. A lot of these chaplains are talking about they curse like sailors, or in the case of Father John Ruderman, airmen.
But I remember when he came to do I think you were there, Father Bob, or I can't remember, or maybe it was Father Jack at the time when
I was there when he visited
our mission. And he was telling a story about going into, I think it was Afghanistan, for a mass. And it was like, but they had to do it undercover at night. And the Navy SEALs brought him in at night, like basically covered him, to the place. He did it like under candlelight, and then snuck him back,
Mm-hmm.
right in the middle of like a place where you could easily get fired upon and all this. And I just sort of pictured in my head, like, this whole, dangerous but cool at the same time. That was, these stories you can come up with, or the risk you're doing to give people the sacraments is almost like you're in the early church again,
Right.
where you're doing it totally undercover. You don't want to get caught, you could get shot at, blah, blah, blah. And, but you could tell he just absolutely loves it,
Yep.
absolutely loves it,
I was looking at, I think it's Father Kapaun, that of the famous picture of him celebrating mass on the hood of the Jeep.
Yeah.
I think that's him, but he's got his combat boots on. The hood of the Jeep is covered in one of those green army blanket that every military family has owned at some point. It's scratchy and uncomfortable, but he's got kind of like just the hood of the Jeep is covered. He's celebrating mass. There's like one soldier there, and he's got his stolen chasuble and everything on. But I was thinking, what we don't have a military chaplain on this podcast right now, but it's when they don't wear military chaplains that are Christian military chaplains. There's no designation that you're a priest. You wear a Protestant you wear a cross, just like the Protestant chaplains wear. I guess there's three the Protestants, the Muslims, and Jews obviously have that Star of David, but that's it. There's nothing that that you would look at any of these guys and know they were a Catholic priest. But that picture came to mind of Father Kapaun, celebrating mass with his combat boots on. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, I've got here in my hand a challenge coin, a Father Emil Kapaun challenge coin, and I always thought it looked a little funny. I know our listeners can't see it right now, but no, it's that exact image.
Yeah.
He's turning around saying "Dominus vobiscum," the Lord be with you. There's the guy kneeling there, and they're just like they're right in the middle of it's like muddy and rocky and nasty, and he's celebrating Holy Mass.
Well,
right
some of the Hollywood movies have really done it right when they have scenes involving chaplains, especially in combat. Like, you see some of the D-Day, the landings at the beaches, the first couple days in Normandy. Yeah, and you see these priests celebrating mass and giving blessings, which I'm sure brought at least a minute or second of comfort to some of these guys, but they're unfazed by what's going on around them, and it's probably what exactly it was. Listening to
I
some of
mean,
the guys' descriptions of these two that we've been talking about today.
I can only imagine how much more confident I would be as a soldier, as a Marine, about to go into battle, knowing that I was ready to meet the Lord. Why? Because my chaplain took the time for me, right? We were staging, we were getting ready for this, and he's going barrack to barrack, man to man, to make sure we were all right. That's tremendous. That's priceless.
All right, folks. Well, thanks for joining us, and please pray for our chaplains, especially our Catholic chaplains. There are a few of them serving our U.S. military, and for Veterans Day, I think also send a little prayer their way, because I think they're sort of forgotten soldiers, and we don't realize what they do for our country. And like these other soldiers that give their life to protect our freedom, they're there to encounter the souls of these men that are giving our lives for Christ. And a lot of conversions come out of this, because a lot of times, with that expression, there's no such thing as the atheist in a foxhole. A lot of people find their faith because of the witness of these very brave and sometimes it's just the everyday stuff they do with the guys. It's just they're there when they need them, and there's a huge respect that these guys have for these guys that are willing to get dirty with the soldiers. So, and
Yeah.
why don't we say a St. Michael prayer? And Father Bob, thanks for sharing that book. And what was the name of that book for the listeners that might want to read that?
It is called Heroic Catholic Chaplains.
And who's it by?
So I encourage you guys to look that up. I haven't read it cover to cover, but I started to read it, and it's Heroic Catholic Chaplains. Subtitle is Stories of the Brave and Holy Men Who Dodged Bullets While Saving Souls.
Love it. Love it. Would you give us a blessing, Father?
We'll pray in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Good and gracious Father, thank you for this day. Thank you for those men whom you have called to be your chaplains, who, as the title of the book said, dodge bullets and save souls. Those who were willing to give everything, and some who did give everything for the sake of the salvation of souls. Give us that same fervor. Give us that same faith. Fill us with the fervor of the saints. And may Almighty God bless all of you who are listening, in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen.